Harold Richardson walked slowly through the busy airport on that Tuesday morning. His old brown shoes squeaked a little on the polished floor. People rushed past him, pulling their heavy suitcases and checking their phones. Nobody paid attention to the 78-year-old man in his simple gray sweater and dark pants. He looked like any other grandfather traveling to see family. His hair was white and thinning. His face had deep lines from years of smiling. He carried an old leather briefcase that had seen better days. The handle was worn smooth from decades of use. To everyone around him, Harold was just another elderly traveler trying to get from one place to another. But Harold had a secret, a very big secret that nobody could guess just by looking at him. For over 50 years, Harold had been building something incredible. He started with just a few $1,000s and a dream. Now he owned one of the biggest investment companies in the world. Richardson Capital Management had grown into a giant that controlled billions of dollars. Harold could buy and sell entire companies with just a phone call. Yet here he was, walking through Chicago's busy airport like any regular person. He could have taken his private jet. He owned 3 of them. He could have had a team of assistants handle everything for him. Instead, Harold chose to fly on regular airlines. He liked staying connected to how normal people lived. "I never want to forget where I came from," he always told his employees. "The moment you stop understanding regular people is the moment you lose touch with reality." Harold made his way to Gate C-14. The waiting area was packed with tired travelers. Kids were crying. Adults looked stressed as they stared at the departure boards. Flight delays were being announced every few minutes. The whole place felt tense and uncomfortable. He found his gate and looked at his boarding pass. First class, seat 2A. Harold had earned enough miles over the years to upgrade automatically, but even in first class he never acted like he was better than anyone else. He always said please and thank you to the flight attendants. He helped other passengers put their bags in the overhead bins when he could. Today felt different, though. Harold noticed the gate agents looked more stressed than usual. They were having heated conversations on their phones. Passengers were getting angry about delays. Something was definitely wrong. Harold pulled out his phone and texted his granddaughter Lucy. "Can't wait to see you blow out those 12 candles tonight, sweetheart. Grandpa is on his way." Lucy had been planning this birthday party for weeks. She wanted Harold to meet her new friends from school. She had told everyone that her grandpa was the coolest old guy in the world, and that he knew how to make paper airplanes that could fly across the whole house. Harold smiled as he put his phone away. Lucy had no idea that her grandpa was worth more money than most small countries. To her, he was just the man who never missed her birthday, who taught her how to play chess, and who always brought the best bedtime stories. The boarding process began 30 minutes late. Harold waited patiently in the first-class line. He watched families struggle with their luggage and saw business travelers tap their feet impatiently. Everyone seemed on edge. When Harold finally got on the plane, he settled into his window seat. The flight attendant, a young woman named Jennifer, greeted him warmly. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you anything before we take off?" "Just some water would be nice, dear," Harold replied with a gentle smile. "And thank you for working so hard today. I can see everyone is stressed about the delays." Jennifer's face lit up. Most first-class passengers barely acknowledged her existence. "Thank you so much for saying that, sir. It has been a really tough morning." Harold pulled out his favorite book, a mystery novel he had been reading for weeks. He never rushed through books anymore. At his age, he had learned to enjoy every page, every chapter. Time was precious, and he didn't want to waste any of it. As he opened his book, Harold noticed commotion near the gate. Through the small airplane window, he could see gate agents having another urgent conversation. Their body language suggested serious problems. Other passengers were starting to notice too. "Ladies and gentlemen," came an announcement over the intercom. "We're going to have a slight delay while we resolve a technical issue. Please remain seated." Harold had heard that announcement countless times over the years. Usually it meant something more complicated than a technical problem. In his business, he had learned to read between the lines. This felt like an overbooking situation. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, another announcement confirmed his suspicions. "We're looking for volunteers to take a later flight today. We can offer travel vouchers and hotel accommodations for anyone willing to help us out." The cabin fell silent. Nobody wanted to volunteer. Everyone had places to be, people to see, important meetings to attend. Harold thought about Lucy's party. He had never missed one of her birthdays. This wasn't the day to start. A few passengers grumbled about the airline's poor planning. Others started making phone calls to warn people they might be late. Harold just sat quietly, hoping the situation would resolve itself quickly. He had no idea that in the next few minutes his quiet Tuesday morning was about to turn into something that would shake the entire airline industry. The elderly man in seat 2A, who looked like someone's harmless grandfather, was about to show the world what real power looked like. But for now, Harold just wanted to get to Phoenix in time to see his granddaughter blow out her birthday candles. That's all that mattered to him. Everything else could wait. 20 minutes passed and still no volunteers came forward. Harold could feel the tension building in the cabin. Passengers were checking their watches and whispering to each other. The flight attendants looked nervous as they walked up and down the aisles. Then Jennifer, the friendly flight attendant, approached Harold's seat. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a worried expression. She carried a clipboard and looked like she didn't want to be having this conversation. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but we have a situation. The gate agents need to speak with some passengers about taking a later flight." Harold looked up from his book and gave her a kind smile. "I understand, dear, but I really can't take a later flight today. It's my granddaughter's birthday and I promised I'd be there." Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "I completely understand, sir. Let me talk to my supervisor and see what we can do." But 5 minutes later, it wasn't Jennifer who came back. Instead, a woman in a blue airline uniform marched down the aisle. Her name tag read, Patricia, Gate Supervisor. She looked tired and frustrated, like someone who had been dealing with problems all morning. "Sir, I need you to gather your belongings and come with me," Patricia said in a sharp voice. She didn't smile. She didn't even look directly at Harold. Harold closed his book and looked up at her calmly. "I'm sorry, but I explained to the flight attendant that I can't take a later flight today. Perhaps you could ask someone else?" Patricia's face hardened. "Sir, this isn't a request. We have the right to remove passengers when the flight is oversold. You've been selected and you need to come with me now." Other passengers started turning around to watch. Harold could feel their eyes on him. A businessman across the aisle put down his phone to listen. A mother with 2 small children looked concerned. "I understand you have policies," Harold said quietly, "but I've been flying with your airline for over 30 years. I'm a frequent flyer with gold status. My ticket is paid in full, and I'm sitting in first class. Surely there must be someone else who could volunteer." Patricia rolled her eyes. She had clearly been dealing with difficult passengers all day and she wasn't in the mood for more pushback. "Sir, your frequent flyer status doesn't matter right now. We need seats, and you've been chosen. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Harold remained calm, but his voice became a little firmer. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want to understand why I'm being singled out. Could you please show me the criteria you use to select passengers?" This question seemed to irritate Patricia even more. "We don't have to explain our selection process to you, sir. Company policy gives us the right to remove passengers as we see fit. Now please, gather your things." The businessman across the aisle spoke up. "Excuse me, but this doesn't seem right. This gentleman is being very polite and he's in first class. Why not ask for volunteers in economy first?" Patricia spun around to face the businessman. "Sir, please mind your own business. This doesn't concern you." But now other passengers were paying attention. A woman near the back called out, "This is wrong. He's an elderly man who's done nothing wrong." Harold felt embarrassed by all the attention. He had never liked being the center of drama. "Please, everyone, it's okay. I just want to understand the situation better." Patricia was getting angrier by the minute. The last thing she wanted was passengers questioning her authority. "Sir, if you don't cooperate right now, I'm going to call security. Is that what you want?" Harold's eyebrows raised slightly. In all his years of business, he had learned that when someone threatens you instead of explaining their position, they usually don't have a good reason for what they're doing. Ma'am, I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm simply asking reasonable questions about why I'm being removed from a flight I paid for. If you could just explain the selection process or let me speak with your manager, I'm sure we can work this out. But Patricia had made up her mind. She saw an elderly man who looked harmless and assumed he would be easy to push around. She had no idea that Harold had spent 50 years negotiating with some of the toughest business leaders in the world. That's it, Patricia announced loudly. Security is being called. Sir, you are being disruptive and refusing to follow crew instructions. Harold's mouth fell open slightly. Disruptive? I haven't raised my voice or been rude to anyone. I'm simply asking questions. Jennifer, the flight attendant, looked uncomfortable. She had seen the whole conversation, and Harold had been nothing but polite. But Patricia was her supervisor, and she couldn't contradict her publicly. Other passengers started pulling out their phones. In today's world, everyone knew that airline incidents could become viral videos within hours. The businessman across the aisle had already started recording. This is completely unnecessary, Harold said, still speaking in his calm, measured tone. I understand you have a difficult job, but calling security on a customer who's asking reasonable questions seems extreme. Patricia wasn't backing down. She had committed to this course of action, and her pride wouldn't let her admit she might be wrong. Sir, you've had multiple opportunities to cooperate and you've refused. Security is on their way. Harold sat back in his seat and took a deep breath. In his business career, he had faced much tougher opponents than an angry gate supervisor. But this situation felt different. It wasn't about winning or losing a negotiation. It was about basic human dignity and respect. As they waited for security to arrive, Harold thought about Lucy's birthday party. He imagined her waiting for him, checking the clock, wondering why Grandpa was late. For the first time since this ordeal began, Harold felt a flash of real anger. Not at Patricia, exactly, but at a system that allowed people in positions of minor authority to treat customers like they didn't matter. Harold had built his fortune by understanding that every person deserved respect, regardless of their appearance or status. Soon, Patricia would learn that lesson the hard way. The footsteps of security officers could be heard approaching the aircraft. Harold straightened his shoulders and prepared for whatever came next. He had no idea that this moment would change everything. Not just for him, but for the entire airline industry. 3 security officers walked onto the plane, their heavy boots echoing in the quiet cabin. Everyone stopped talking and stared. The officers wore dark uniforms with badges and radios clipped to their shoulders. They looked serious and ready for trouble. The lead officer, a tall man with graying hair, approached Patricia. She pointed directly at Harold and whispered something in the officer's ear. Harold could see her shaking her head and gesturing with her hands, clearly painting him as some kind of problem passenger. Harold sat quietly in his seat, his hands folded on his lap. He watched the officers approach with a mixture of sadness and disbelief. In all his 78 years, he had never been treated like a criminal. He thought about his late wife, Catherine, and how shocked she would be to see this happening. Sir, we need you to come with us, the lead officer said, when he reached Harold's row. His voice was firm but not unkind. There's been a complaint that you're being uncooperative with the flight crew. Harold looked up at the officer with tired eyes. Officer, I understand you're just doing your job, but I haven't been uncooperative. I simply asked some questions about why I was being removed from my paid seat. I never raised my voice or caused any disturbance. The businessman across the aisle spoke up again. Officer, I've been watching this whole situation. This gentleman has been nothing but polite. He's done absolutely nothing wrong. Other passengers began nodding and murmuring in agreement. A teacher traveling with her school group said loudly, "This is terrible. He's just an old man trying to get to his granddaughter's birthday." But the officers had been called for a reason, and they had procedures to follow. The lead officer looked around at all the phone cameras now pointed in his direction. This was exactly the kind of situation that could end up on social media within minutes. Sir, we're going to need you to gather your belongings and come with us peacefully. the officer said to Harold. "We can discuss the details once we're off the aircraft." Harold nodded slowly. He had hoped this could be resolved with simple conversation, but it was clear that wouldn't happen. "Of course, officer. I'll cooperate fully." Harold reached under the seat in front of him to get his old leather briefcase. As he lifted it, the worn handle caught on something and twisted in his grip. Papers scattered across the aisle floor, business documents, family photos, and his boarding pass. The businessman quickly bent down to help gather the papers. As he handed them back to Harold, he whispered, "This is wrong, sir. Everyone can see that." Harold smiled gratefully. "Thank you, son. Sometimes good people have to follow bad orders. I understand that." As Harold stood up from his seat, he felt every one of his 78 years. His knees were stiff from sitting, and the stress of the situation was taking its toll. He moved slowly, carefully, like the elderly man he was. The security officers positioned themselves around Harold as if he were dangerous. One officer walked in front, one behind, and one to the side. Passengers gasped at the sight. Here was a grandfather who probably couldn't hurt a fly being escorted like some kind of threat. "This is ridiculous," shouted a young mother holding her baby. "What's wrong with you people?" As they walked Harold up the aisle toward the exit, more passengers began speaking up. "Shame on you," called out an elderly woman. "That could be anyone's grandfather." A teenager started recording with his phone, live streaming the entire incident. Within minutes, the video was being shared across social media platforms. The caption read, "Elderly man removed from plane for asking questions. This is heartbreaking." Harold kept his head high as they walked him off the plane. He nodded politely to passengers who expressed support. Even in this embarrassing moment, he maintained his dignity. Years of leading board meetings and handling difficult business situations had taught him to stay calm under pressure. But inside, Harold was heartbroken, not because of how he was being treated, but because he could see the clock on the terminal wall. Lucy's party started in 6 hours, and he was still in Chicago. For the first time in 12 years, he was going to miss his granddaughter's birthday. The officers escorted Harold through the jet bridge and into the terminal. Other travelers stopped to stare at the scene. Some pulled out phones to record. Others shook their heads in disgust. A few applauded Harold as he passed, showing their support. They brought Harold to a small security office near the gate. The room was bare except for a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a water cooler in the corner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the white walls. "Sir, please have a seat," the lead officer said, pointing to one of the uncomfortable chairs. "We need to get some information from you and figure out what happened back there." Harold sat down carefully, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him. "Officer, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. But could someone please call my granddaughter? She's expecting me at her birthday party tonight, and I don't want her to worry." The officer looked surprised. In his experience, people who cause problems on planes usually weren't worried about disappointing their grandchildren. "What's her number, sir? I'll have someone make the call." As Harold recited Lucy's phone number, his voice cracked slightly. He imagined her excited face, waiting for Grandpa to arrive. She had probably been checking the window every few minutes, watching for his taxi. The second officer stepped outside to make the call, while the third officer began filling out paperwork. Harold sat alone with the lead officer, who seemed to be having second thoughts about the whole situation. "Sir, can you tell me exactly what happened on that plane?" the officer asked. "The gate supervisor said you were being disruptive and refusing to follow crew instructions." Harold took a deep breath and began to explain. He told the officer about the overbooking situation, his polite questions about the selection process, and his reasonable request to speak with a manager. He never raised his voice or showed anger even now. The officer listened carefully, taking notes. This story was very different from what Patricia had told him. He had expected to deal with an angry, difficult passenger. Instead, he found a polite, elderly man who seemed genuinely confused about why he was there. Through the small window in the security office, Harold could see Flight 847 backing away from the gate. His seat was now empty, heading to Phoenix without him. He closed his eyes and thought about Lucy blowing out her birthday candles without Grandpa there to sing happy birthday. What Harold didn't know was that the videos from the plane were already going viral. Millions of people were watching an elderly grandfather being treated like a criminal for asking simple questions. The story was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined, and in a few hours, Harold would make a phone call that would change everything. 2 hours passed in that cold security office. Harold sat patiently, answering the same questions over and over again. The officers had reviewed the security footage from the plane 3 times. Each time it showed the same thing. Harold being polite and cooperative, while Patricia became increasingly aggressive. The lead officer, whose name was Detective Johnson, was starting to feel uncomfortable about the whole situation. He had been doing this job for 15 years, and he knew the difference between a real troublemaker and someone who had been treated unfairly. "Mr. Richardson," Detective Johnson said finally, "I've watched all the footage, and honestly, I don't see any evidence that you were disruptive or uncooperative. You asked reasonable questions and remained calm throughout the entire interaction." Harold nodded quietly. "Thank you for taking the time to review everything properly, Detective. I appreciate your fairness." "The airline is saying they won't press any charges," Detective Johnson continued. "You're free to go. I'm sorry this happened to you, sir. Sometimes these situations get out of hand for no good reason." Harold stood up slowly from the hard metal chair. His back was stiff from sitting for so long, and he felt every one of his 78 years. "I understand you were just doing your job, Detective. No hard feelings." As Harold gathered his things, Detective Johnson walked him to the door. "Sir, if I were you, I'd consider filing a complaint with the airline. What happened to you wasn't right, and they should know about it." Harold shook the detective's hand. "I'll think about it. Thank you again for your professionalism." Harold walked slowly through the terminal, his old briefcase in hand. Around him, travelers rushed to catch flights, completely unaware of what had just happened. He felt invisible again, just another elderly man making his way through a busy airport. He found a quiet corner near a coffee shop and sat down in a cushioned chair. The exhaustion was hitting him now, both physical and emotional. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed Lucy's number. "Grandpa," Lucy's excited voice came through the phone. "Where are you? Everyone's asking when you're going to get here." Harold's heart broke a little more. He could hear party music and children laughing in the background. "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but Grandpa had some trouble with his flight. I'm not going to make it to your party tonight." There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then Lucy's small voice asked, "Are you okay, Grandpa? You sound sad." "I'm fine, honey. Just disappointed that I can't be there to sing happy birthday with you. Can you save me a piece of cake?" "Of course, Grandpa. Mom says you can come visit next weekend instead. We'll have another little party just for you." After Harold hung up, he sat quietly for a moment. In 50 years of business, he had faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and boardroom battles that would make grown men cry. But disappointing his granddaughter felt worse than all of those combined. Harold pulled out his phone again and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Margaret Collins had been his executive assistant for 22 years. She knew all his business better than anyone else in the world. "Margaret, it's Harold," he said when she answered on the first ring. "Mr. Richardson, how was your flight? Are you in Phoenix already?" Harold took a deep breath. "Actually, Margaret, I'm still in Chicago. I need you to do something for me, and it's very important." Margaret could hear the serious tone in his voice. In all her years working for Harold, she had learned to recognize when he was truly upset about something. "Of course, sir. What do you need?" "I want you to pull up all of our investment files related to Stellar Airlines. Everything we own, through all our funds and partnerships. I need exact numbers, and I need them within the hour." Margaret was surprised. Harold rarely made sudden business decisions based on personal experiences. "Sir, may I ask what this is about?" Harold looked around the busy terminal. Somewhere in this airport, Patricia was probably dealing with other passengers the same way. She had treated him. How many other elderly people had been humiliated like this? How many families had missed important events because of poor customer service? "Margaret, I was just treated very poorly by this airline. Not just rudely, but in a way that showed complete disrespect for basic human dignity. I want to understand exactly what kind of financial relationship we have with this company. Margaret's fingers were already flying across her keyboard. I'm pulling the reports now, sir. Should I also contact our legal team? Yes, please do. Ask them to research Stellar Airlines' customer service policies and any recent complaints or lawsuits. I want a full picture of how they treat their passengers. Harold waited for Margaret to compile the information. He watched other travelers around him. An elderly couple was struggling with their heavy bags. A mother was trying to calm her crying baby while managing 3 other children. Everyone looked stressed and tired. Harold thought about his own company, Richardson Capital Management. Over the years, he had built it on simple principles. Treat people with respect, keep your word, and never forget that behind every number was a real human being with real feelings. Mr. Richardson, Margaret's voice came back on the phone. I have the preliminary numbers. Are you sitting down? Yes, Margaret. What did you find? Sir, through our various investment vehicles, Richardson Capital controls approximately $4.2 billion worth of Stellar Airlines stock. That makes us their 3rd largest shareholder. Harold was quiet for a moment, processing this information. In the business world, $4.2 billion was serious money. It was the kind of money that could make executives pay attention. It was the kind of money that gave you a voice in how a company was run. Margaret, I want you to schedule an emergency board meeting for Thursday morning. We need to discuss our aviation investments and make sure they align with our company values. Of course, sir. Should I prepare any specific agenda items? Harold looked at his watch. Somewhere in Phoenix, Lucy was probably opening her birthday presents without him. Yes, Margaret. Put together a complete analysis of Stellar Airlines' customer service record. I want to know if what happened to me today is part of a larger pattern. I'll get right on it, sir. Is there anything else you need? Harold thought for a moment. Yes, Margaret. Contact our communications team as well. I have a feeling this story is going to get bigger than just one old man missing his granddaughter's birthday party. As Harold hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger exactly, but a sense of purpose. He had spent his entire career building wealth and creating jobs. Now he had a chance to use that success to make sure other people weren't treated the way he had been treated today. Harold didn't know it yet, but his phone call had just set in motion events that would shake the entire airline industry. The quiet, polite grandfather who had been dismissed as harmless was about to show the world what real power looked like when it was used for the right reasons. By Wednesday morning, the videos from Harold's flight had been viewed over 10 million times. The footage showed everything clearly. An elderly grandfather asking polite questions and being dragged off a plane like a criminal. People were outraged. Harold woke up in his hotel room in Chicago to find his phone buzzing with messages from reporters, friends, and even strangers who had seen the videos online. He had never experienced anything like this level of public attention. Margaret called him at 7 in the morning. Mr. Richardson, I've been working all night with our legal and communications teams. The story is everywhere. CNN, Fox News, even international outlets are picking it up. Harold sat on the edge of his hotel bed, still wearing his pajamas. What are people saying? They're calling it a perfect example of corporate bullying. The hashtag Justice for Grandpa Harold is trending on social media. People are sharing their own stories about being mistreated by airlines. Harold shook his head in amazement. All I wanted was to get to Lucy's birthday party. Sir, our legal team has finished their research on Stellar Airlines. You're not going to like what they found. Margaret's report was shocking. Over the past 3 years, Stellar Airlines had faced over 200 complaints about mistreating elderly passengers. They had a pattern of targeting older travelers for removal because they assumed these passengers would be less likely to fight back or cause public relations problems. The airline had paid millions in quiet settlements to avoid bad publicity. They had a training manual that actually taught employees to identify compliant passenger types, which included elderly people traveling alone. Harold listened to all of this with growing anger. Not just about his own treatment, but about all the other grandparents who had been humiliated and never had the power to fight back. Margaret, I want you to contact every major news outlet and schedule interviews. I'm going to tell this story properly. Sir, are you sure? Once you go public, there's no going back. This will become very big very quickly. Harold thought about Lucy, who had called him the night before to say her friends at school were talking about the airplane grandpa video. She didn't even know it was her own grandfather yet. Yes, Margaret. It's time to use our voice for something that matters. The Richardson Capital Board meeting on Thursday morning was unlike any in the company's 50-year history. Instead of discussing quarterly earnings and investment strategies, they were talking about human dignity and corporate responsibility. Harold sat at the head of the mahogany conference table, addressing 12 of the most powerful business leaders in the country. These were people who controlled pension funds, insurance companies, and investment portfolios worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Ladies and gentlemen, Harold began, we've built this company on the principle that business success should never come at the expense of basic human decency. Stellar Airlines has violated that principle in the most public way possible. The Pauker board members had all seen the videos. They had also read Margaret's research about the airline's systematic mistreatment of vulnerable passengers. The evidence was overwhelming. I'm proposing that Richardson Capital divest completely from Stellar Airlines, all $4.2 billion of our investment. Furthermore, I want us to send a clear message about why we're doing this. Board member Catherine Wong, who had worked with Harold for 15 years, spoke up. Harold, this is a significant financial decision. Are you sure you want to base it on a personal experience? Harold leaned forward in his chair. Catherine, this isn't about personal revenge. This is about the kind of companies we choose to support with our investors' money. Do we really want to profit from a business that treats customers this way? The vote was unanimous. Richardson Capital would sell all of its Stellar Airlines holdings and issue a public statement explaining why. When the markets opened on Friday morning, the news hit like a thunderbolt. Richardson Capital's announcement sent Stellar Airlines stock plummeting immediately. Other major investors quickly followed suit, not wanting to be associated with the growing scandal. By noon, Stellar Airlines had lost over $6 billion in market value. Their stock price fell 22% in a single day, the biggest drop in the company's history. But Harold wasn't finished. His interviews with major news networks aired throughout the weekend. Unlike typical corporate executives, Harold spoke like a regular person. He talked about missing Lucy's birthday party. He talked about other elderly passengers who had been treated poorly. He made it personal and relatable. This isn't about money, Harold told one interviewer. This is about remembering that every passenger is someone's parent, grandparent, or child. They deserve basic respect. The public response was overwhelming. Millions of people shared their own stories of airline mistreatment. Consumer advocacy groups called for congressional hearings. Other companies started reviewing their customer service policies, afraid of becoming the next target. Stellar Airlines CEO tried to control the damage with a public apology, but it was too late. The story had taken on a life of its own. Passengers were canceling flights and choosing other airlines. Travel agents were recommending competitors. Within 2 weeks, Stellar Airlines announced a complete overhaul of their customer service policies. They fired Patricia and several other supervisors who had similar complaints in their records. They created an independent passenger advocate program and implemented new training for all employees. Most importantly, they agreed to pay $2.3 billion to settle a class action lawsuit representing thousands of passengers who had been mistreated over the years. Harold donated his entire personal settlement, $12 million, to organizations that helped elderly travelers and fought against age discrimination. 3 months later, Harold finally made it to Phoenix for Lucy's rescheduled birthday celebration. This time, he flew on a different airline that treated him with the respect every passenger deserved. As Lucy blew out her candles for the second time that year, she looked at her grandfather and said, "Grandpa, I saw you on TV. My friends say you're famous now." Harold smiled and hugged his granddaughter tight. "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I just reminded some people that everyone deserves to be treated nicely." The story became a case study in business schools around the world, showing how customer service directly affects company value. More importantly, it reminded everyone that real power isn't about money or position. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it would be easier to stay quiet. Harold Richardson had started that Tuesday morning as just another elderly passenger trying to get to a birthday party. He ended it as the man who changed how airlines treat their customers forever. And Lucy finally got her perfect birthday party, with Grandpa right where he belonged.